Good morning, everyone. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you, Hannah. I was wondering whether I could top a cow story, but I was thinking I had a nasty incident with the slipper limper a few years ago, but I didn't go into that. And I just need to thank David as well for really summarising a hugely complicated and difficult area of Brexit, you know, on a UK scale, but also taking into account a lot of those local things as well, and obviously saying the vast majority of the things that I was going to say now as well. So,
sorry.
Thanks very much for that. But I think, as well as my thanks, I just need to give a quick apology. And when John asked me to do this several months ago, to talk about Brexit and talk about what the impacts might be, he said to me, he said, "Can you talk for 20 minutes?" And I said, "Absolutely." He said, "No, what it means, can you talk about something substantial for 20 minutes about Brexit?" And I said, "By November? Of course you can." But of course, the one thing that we all know is that we haven't got there yet. As David said, one of the things we are only certain about Brexit is that we're not certain. There is uncertainty. That is where we've reached at this moment in time. But I think Brexit is interesting, and one of the things that is interesting about it is it elicits so many different responses from so many different people. Now, I'll just do something very, very quickly on the flip side. And what I'm going to do is see if I can get a word from everyone. So, if I say Brexit, what's the first word that pops into your head? Scott?
More work.
Jim?
Confusion.
Is that right?
Confusion.
Confusion.
Worry.
Freedom.
Minister. Cost.
Risk.
Madness. Immigration.
You see, people have loads and loads of different views about it. It's quite an interesting subject.
Expensive.
Expensive.
Cost.
Cost. Chaos.
Autonomy.
Autonomy. It is one of those things that just elicits loads of different responses from different people. Some people think it's going to be pretty awful. Storms gathering, clouds ahead. We're entering into this era of extra regulation, extra confusion, uncertainty, and complication. It's much better to be in the club if we're going to have to follow the rules of the club. Why do we want to get out? Why do we want to leave? Some people, as we've heard, it's the best thing we could ever do. Future's orange. We're getting out. None more of this crazy regulation. We have to only sell straight bananas or whatever we were told we have to do. Fishermen have to wear hairnets and everything else. All that nonsense is all gone. We're free. Norman said, we're free to do what we want. Most people, it seems, somewhere in the middle on all of these things. And the only thing they really want is some sort of clarity. Especially in lots of businesses seem to be. They want some sort of clarity as where we go. But I was thinking, what else has Brexit given us so far? Now, it seems it has given us a few things. We've had more acronyms to deal with recently than you can ever believe. We've had WTO, FTAs, CETA, DIDS, DEXUs, goodness knows what. It's been very generous on the acronym front. And I guess it's been pretty generous on the word front. We've got a whole load of new words that we didn't have before. Hard and soft Brexit, obviously, and then various different colour kinds of Brexits. Article 50, Canada model, Canada model plus, Canada model plus plus, Norway model, Swiss model. I mean, all these other kinds of models. Regulatory alignment, Henry VIII powers, transition Brexit means Brexit, and that horrid one, nothing is agreed till everything is agreed, whatever that means. It's also, I think, given the media lots of opportunity. It's filled every single page of every single newspaper. Slight exaggeration, but it's given a whole lot of stuff to talk about. And the reason is because no one really knows the answer. So we've had every day in the newspaper or on the television, Brexit deal means this, Brexit deal means that. We have the Irish border solved, Irish border's not solved. We're having another referendum, we're not having that. And it just goes on and on and on. I mean, the combination of Brexit and the current incumbent of the White House has filled the papers and the front pages forever. I mean, even this morning on the radio just driving in, we had David Davis talking about legal opinions. We had the head of Sainsbury's talking about supply chains. We had another conference going on in Paris talking about security. It is absolutely all over the place. But nothing particularly substantial so far in terms of what people in their daily lives and their businesses will have to do and will have to kind of cope with once the UK to do indeed leave the EU. It's quite interesting just to look back very quickly about what some of the other views were about the UK's decision to leave the EU. I was in Brussels not long after the referendum happened, And in that great big building that they have there, where you see on the telly all the time, the Berlin one, in the middle of Brussels. And with a few other people from the UK. We sat down in these nice chairs, and apart from the EU members of staff saying, don't get too comfortable, you're not staying there for very long, you're going to have to go. The reason they were all just a bit annoyed with the UK was the general sort of feeling that people had. And the reason they were just generally annoyed is that in the EU, particularly amongst the Commission, the UK was seen as very much an honest broker, a sensible negotiating partner. And they seem to be the balance to lots of other, perhaps more slightly partisan views of different countries when it came to making decisions and getting agreement. So they were just generally annoyed that they were losing someone that was quite sensible. I was in France not long after again. I didn't spend all my time just travelling around Europe, by the way, to do stuff here too. But I was in France as well, and friends had a very different view about Brexit. And in many ways, their view was really astonishment is the best way I could characterise it with lots of people. But perhaps not for the reason that you'd think. This weekend is obviously Remembrance Weekend, and we'll have lots of commemorations of the two world wars. And in France, they were telling me that there is still a collective memory, there's still something in the French psyche that means that they are quite happy to accept a system, whatever that system might be, that will prevent anything that could repeat those events that happened in the last century. It's still very much in their minds as a nation, which is something I hadn't actually thought about. Those horrific events were something that they were very happy to accept EU regulations and an EU thing in terms of actually having a system that prevented further war in Europe. I talked a little bit later to this guy as well, after the meeting finished, and said, well, he did say, well, of course, there's different views in France as there are in the UK. And we talked a little about the referendum, and I said, well, what would happen if there was a referendum in France? And he looked at me, deadpan, he said, well, don't be ridiculous, we would never ask such a stupid question. That's a different way of doing democracy in France. And again, in the UK, it's different as well. People have very, very different views. The UK government itself, certainly pre-referendum, weren't that interested in considering anything other than we're going to stay in votes, and so they were a little bit slow to get going in a lot of their policies and all the decisions that they were needed to make going forward. And they continue to be up until this day. The cabinet is still split, Parliament is split, parties are split, the country is split as to what, how, when, and for some still if the UK should be leaving. But what about here? Let's start looking a little bit about here, more importantly. David's given us a very good overview of those things, and as he mentioned, Jersey's a little bit different. We're a crown dependency, which gives us which is a very different constitutional position. We are self-governing and have been for hundreds of years. We have judicial independence. We have domestic autonomy on most areas. But we have this very, very close union with the UK. So we have freedom of movement, freedom of people, freedom of trade, all set out in these ancient charters that still exist to this day. Our relationship with Europe, as most people in this room will know, is based very much on Protocol 3, which was an addition to the UK's 72 accession treaty, which is still in place, but obviously will fall away when the UK leaves the EU. It's interesting just to think back to P3, because I know people have different views on it, but at the time when it was discussed, when the UK was going into the EEC, it was used very much as an in or out decision for the islands to make. That was really the choice that was originally down on the table. But for various reasons, these royal charters, reasons in agriculture, reasons in fisheries, but most of VAT at the time, going in wasn't such a good idea. Going out didn't seem like such a good idea either, because the UK had made it very clear that out really meant out at the time, and it meant independence, again, which was something that really wasn't appropriate or applicable at the time. P3, and the concept of P3, had been considered very early. It only really came to the fore much later in the discussions, and it was agreed. And in a weird sort of way, it's actually quite a good deal. It is a kind of cake and eat it deal in some ways. You're in for some, but you're out for other sorts of things. But I know there are still some ambiguities in it, so perhaps it's a bit more fudge than cake. But anyway, we still got to eat it. We've talked a little bit about views and people's views. In the island, it's difficult. Everyone has a different view, but again, it seemed like, I thought originally that the majority of farmers really, I think from the JFU, sorry, not JFUs, but the NFUs, take on Brexit was the majority of farmers were very comfortable to stay in the European Union, but clearly what David just said in my conversation with Kit last night was that it wasn't true. Many farmers wanted to come out. Fishermen were certainly exactly the same. Fishermen were very, very keen, but they thought exiting was the best option. And that was mirrored in many ways on the island with different views, depending on your perspective of how you might feel about these things. What about government? Well, the Jersey government, as we all know, and we all didn't get a vote in the Brexit referendum, but obviously we have talked about, and David has referred to many things that could impact on us. But the Jersey government did set in place relatively quickly a set of objectives that they put forward to the UK, which they wanted the UK to represent on our behalf in negotiations with Brussels. And they are the things that you'd expect. There's a longer list, but it distills into these. We really wanted to continue our relationship with the UK, for the reasons we've talked about before. And as far as possible, the benefits of our relationship with the EU. The third one is interesting as well. This is about, and David referred to it in terms of the FTAs, the future trade agreements that might be in place. It's making sure that we're in a position to benefit from those. And I think actually in the context of agriculture, that's quite an important one. It may be that certain products might be wanting to move further than the UK or the EU, and the ability to piggyback on these is something that we might want to do. And then the last one, just make sure we have the right structure in government and the right structures to make sure that people in Jersey, businesses in Jersey, knew what they might have to do. I put this in really, it's quite an old slide now actually, and it has changed since then. I'll talk about that in a minute, but really just to show you the view, certainly the ministers and the council ministers at the time took and continue to take nowadays. There's obviously a Brexit ministerial group that oversees this project, this work stream, and also the policies that come from it, which is right. And actually, to be honest, because it's such a wide portfolio, it is almost the Council of Ministers that do that. Under that, there's a Brexit working group, which is an officer group, which then looks to deliver that policy. But I wanted to show you a bit underneath, really, just to show financial services clearly are going to have a role in all this, as well customs and immigration. You know about that, those are the sort of things. But ministers were insistent early on that ag and fish was going to be one of those key work streams, which I think is important to note, and also, from your perspective, something that you should take credit for, that even though if we're looking very much in terms of economic or GVA type of stuff, when you consider the financial services, it's small, but clearly it's a very, very important sector of the economy in terms of culture and history, but also in terms of the value that it generates economically as well. So, ministers' insistence that ag and fish were one of those original work streams. And I'm lucky enough to head up that work stream for government, hence here today. So despite usually spending most of my time in the sea or on the sea, that is why I am involved in the Brexit stuff. Just to give a bit of detail, and also underpinning all of that is really around legislation. There's quite a significant, as you might expect, work stream that looks at legislation because we have had a relationship with the EU for 40 years, and there are some things that we clearly need to change going forward. But I say the ag and fish work stream is something that has developed and I think has worked quite well. We've engaged with various sectors of the industry over time, the arable sector, horticulture, the dairy and the fisheries sector as well, to try and start discussions as best we could given the information that we had at the time, as David has mentioned, in terms of looking at what problems might be coming down the track and how we might go around looking to solve them. But I think the key thing here is that ag and fish remains one of the central work streams within the Brexit overall project. The number of work groups that we've added to since then, and contingency planning is one of them, again, that David referred to, because, as you know, we're still not there. We haven't got any clarity of what a deal might look like, if indeed we have a deal. Very quickly, we all know pretty much what's on this slide, but the majority of agriculture products go to the UK. The dairy products, a bit of a split, vast proportion used on Ireland, but also they have exports to the UK, EU and to third countries. Won't dwell too much on fisheries, but because of this farm conference, but clearly a lot of our fishery products go into the EU, and we are beginning to see that in the event of a no deal, there might be quite some significant barriers to trade for them. Future position is interesting because in many ways what we're talking about is the UK leaving the EU. So in many ways that should be our goal going forward. To achieve access to EU markets as we have done in the past, or at least no less favourable than the UK's one, because as we've talked about, there's lots of other things which we need to take into account because of the potential contagion. And I think what I really want to do, just to not go on too much because of the time, but really sort of drill down into a little bit some of the points that David made around the impact on local businesses. I think really there's probably four main ones that we really should be thinking about. The first one David touched on, which is around rules and regulations. I think we need to be honest that although the UK's decision to leave the EU has focused minds on our relationship with the EU, it has also required us to focus on our relationship with the UK to a certain extent. That relationship is based on quite ancient charters, and in many ways those need really to be updated for, for modern times. So it's likely, we'll make sure, as we've talked about already, we will have to make sure that we comply with standards that are in place for whatever marketplace you're trying to enter. So there may be some requirements to look at rules and regulations, make sure they're up to date, and make sure we're complying with those standards that will be in place to enter those markets. Now, as we know, we have had P3, so in terms of agriculture and agri-food products, it's likely that our legislative base and our product standards are going to be very, very similar. But what we might find is there might be a requirement to demonstrate it in a slightly different way. So there might be kind of requirements around proving that you do all those sorts of things, particularly if you're looking to access the UK's trade deals going further. So third country trade, if we choose to, should the opportunity arise to piggyback these trade deals going forward, that's something that we're certainly going to have to do. We talked about it already. The second one is probably around the labour issues. Don't want to dwell on those, but those are something that will certainly have to be something that we are very cognizant of, and we make sure that we ensure that industries and businesses have the right labour force to carry on what they wish to do. I think the other thing that seems slightly odd, given the fact that we've pretty much said that we're going to keep the same relationship with the UK, I think in the context of Brexit, one of the things that we need to make sure about is supply chain. And I say David's referred to this as well, but I think it may only be a short period of time, perhaps a matter of weeks, matter of months, but I think whenever Brexit is and whatever it looks like, there will be a period of time when businesses and industries will need to make sure that they're very, very sure that their supply chains are resilient, that's either bringing stuff in or getting goods out. Now that will be a conversation, presumably with suppliers and importers and things like that, but that's something that I think businesses should be aware of. So although there's no reason why you should have any difficulty getting product in, providing you follow the rules of market access as we do at the moment, but that's something that could be an indirect impact on your business. Talked a little bit about Dover. We don't go to Dover, but the similar things could happen at ports around the world as well, around the south coast of the UK. And the fourth one is of course accessing the EU market, the European market. We do know that the EU has very, very strict rules for third country access to that market for animal products and products of animal origin. And in the event of a no deal, or indeed event of a deal that may not cover some of those aspects, and because we don't know what that is, getting those products into those markets can be significantly more different. And we all know how much the French like bureaucracy, so if there's some extra paperwork to do, I'm sure they'll make sure that we do actually follow that and have to do it. I think it's clear that although we're not in the EU and we're going to maintain our relationship with the UK, and the vast majority of our trade is with the UK, there will be some impact of Brexit. We can't escape that. But I think there are good things in this, and there is the possibility of new markets. There's a possibility of developing markets in the UK, but also markets further abroad as well. And so there is optimism. I think this chaotic, disorganised exit from the European Union, which a no deal would cause, is something that is not something that the UK or the EU really want. And I think it would reflect badly on both sides of the channel, to be honest. As I said, it's all very uncertain. But it's interesting, actually, just to conclude, that I was talking to a merchant not so long time ago, who I won't name, but he said to me, and I won't say exactly what he said, but to paraphrase, he said, well, whatever government cocks up, we'll have to fix it anyway. And of course, immediately, I mean, he's obviously talking about other governments, not the government of Jersey, but I got what he was kind of saying. You know, businesses are forever adapting to what they do and changing the way they work and making things happen. And of course, in Jersey, we all know we have exceptional products. You know, you grow and you produce exceptional products, and the market will always want products that are exceptional that they can then sell, and that's what business is all about. We will have to prescribe, possibly conform to new standards, possibly conform to EU standards as they develop and going forward. But that's nothing new, that's something that's happened all the time. And of course, my view is that we should always aspire to have the highest standards of production, of growing, or whatever it might be. So that's something that we shouldn't really be afraid of. I say it can be a challenge, it will be a challenge, but that's something not new to farming and something that farming overcomes all the time. And so I think on that note, I'll finish and say thank you.